The sky over Orivas ruins wasn't a sky anymore. It was a suffocating ceiling of bruised purple and toxic charcoal, thick with the metallic tang of spent plasma and the relentless descent of the ash winter. Every breath I took through my filtered respirator tasted like a burnt circuit board. I checked my tactical display. The battery icon flickered a sickly amber, 20%. If the suit's thermal regulator died before I found a heat source, I'd be a frozen slab of organic meat in less than 4 hours. Keep moving, Crow. Don't get stiff. My boots crunched over the pulverized remains of what used to be a grand promenade. Thousands of years of Ethelian history, ground down into gray dust in a single 6-hour purge by the harvester drones. I adjusted the grip on my pulse rifle, the cold seeping through my reinforced gloves. The silence here was heavy, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing against your eardrums, waiting for a reason to shatter. I was 3 kilometers from the extraction point. My mission was a simple smash and grab. Retrieve the encrypted data links from the central archives and bug out before the next sweep of obsidian shards arrived. But the archives were a crater, and the data links were slag. Foobar, I muttered, my voice raspy inside the helmet. Total clusterfuck. I turned a corner, my HUD scanning for heat signatures. There was nothing but the neon rot, that bioluminescent tech fungus that ate away at the city's dead nerves, flickering with a faint, ghostly cyan. Then, a sound. It wasn't the rhythmic clank of a drone or the hum of a hover skiff. It was a hitch, a tiny, stuttering intake of air. I dropped into a low crouch, my rifle sweeping the shadows of a collapsed amphitheater. My internal sensors spiked. A biological signature. Small. Weak. "Show yourself," I barked, my external speakers echoing off the jagged glass walls. "I'm Oscar Mike in 3 minutes. Don't make me grease you because you're jumpy." Nothing but the wind whistling through the twisted rebar. I moved toward a pile of fallen marble slabs. My thermal vision picked up a faint blossom of heat, tucked into a narrow crevice. I used my combat knife to pry a piece of debris loose, expecting a scavenger or a wounded shard scout. Instead, I found Eora. She looked like a porcelain doll someone had tried to burn. Her skin was the color of a moonlit sea, pale, silvery gray. And her hair was a shock of crystalline white, matted with soot. She wasn't human. She was Ethelian. I'd seen pictures of them in the briefing, the highborn of this sector, but they were supposed to be extinct. The purge hadn't left survivors, or so the brass said. Her eyes opened. They weren't just black. They were abyssal, reflecting the entire starlit void of the galaxy in 2 tiny spheres. She didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She just stared at me with a terrifying ancient clarity. "Easy, kid," I said, lowering my rifle slightly. "I'm not one of the tin cans. You're lucky I found you before the next sweep." I reached out, intending to grab her by the collar and haul her to her feet. The moment my gloved hand touched her shoulder, the world exploded in a silent white flash. My HUD screeched. Error. Synaptic interference. A jolt of pure electricity surged up my arm, bypassing the armor's insulation. It felt like my nerves were being rewired in real time. My heart, which had been thumping at a steady 65 beats per minute, suddenly spiked to 100, then settled into a strange, rhythmic thrum that wasn't mine. I tried to pull away, but my muscles refused to obey. On her forearm, a series of geometric patterns began to glow with a fierce, pulsating gold. The glow crawled up her skin and onto mine, searing through my suit like it wasn't even there. What are you doing to me?" I wheezed, falling to my knees. She didn't speak. She just gripped my wrist with a strength that defied her size. The tether was anchoring. I could feel her cold feet, her hunger, the sharp sting of a scratch on her cheek. And deeper than that, I felt her fear. Not the frantic panic of a child, but a vast, cold loneliness that made my own soul feel hollow. Then, the HUD cleared. One single message remained, pulsing in red at the center of my vision. Biological link established. Status anchored. Great, I hissed, the pain finally receding into a dull ache in the center of my chest. Just what I needed. A parasitic hitchhiker. I looked at her. She hadn't let go of my wrist. She looked at my scarred armor, at the iron aegis emblem on my chest, then back to my eyes. "Vaxen," she whispered. I froze. I hadn't told her my name. My helmet was opaque. "How did you—" "We move," she said, her voice like the chime of a distant bell. "The shards. They are 600 meters away. They have felt the pulse." She was right. My long-range scanners picked up multiple high-velocity signatures closing in. Red dots flooded my tactical map. "All right, kid. Change of plans," I said, slinging my rifle over my shoulder and scooping her up. She was light, almost weightless, but the heat radiating from her was intense. "You want to play anchor? Fine. But if we get greased, it's on you." I broke into a sprint, my servos whining as I pushed the suit to its limit. The ash winter swirled around us, a storm of gray feathers, hiding the two of us as we dove into the dark heart of the dead city. The gutter web was a labyrinth of maintenance tunnels and sewage pipes that ran beneath Orivas like the veins of a titan. It was dark, damp, and smelled of ozone and stagnant chemicals. Perfect for hiding, if you didn't mind the toxic mold or the occasional malfunctioning repair bot trying to saw your legs off. I set Eora down once we were deep enough to mask our heat signatures. My chest was still thumping in that weird, synchronized double beat. Every time she breathed, I felt a slight expansion in my own lungs. It was intrusive. It was maddening. "Check your 6, I muttered, more to myself than her, as I scanned the tunnel ahead. "We stay low. These tunnels lead to the old transit hub. If the sub-levels are still pressurized, we might find a functioning comm array." Eora followed me, her small feet making no sound on the wet concrete. She stayed exactly 2 meters behind me. Not 3, not 1. 2. Like she was tethered by an invisible rope. "The glow," I said, gesturing to her arm. The gold patterns had faded to a dull, bruised purple. What was that? Some kind of Athelian defense mechanism? "The tether," she said. Her English was perfect, though the cadence was strange. "It is not a defense. It is a choice. You were the strongest pulse in the ruins. My body recognized you as the anchor." "Well, your body has terrible taste," I spat. "I'm a ghost runner, kid. I get paid to leave people behind, not to play nanny to a glowing alien. As soon as I get a signal, I'm calling in a dust-off and handing you over to the first research ship I find." Eora stopped walking. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my left rib, exactly where I'd taken a shrapnel hit 5 years ago. I gasped, clutching my side. "You are lying," she said softly. "I don't lie to myself, kid. It's bad for business." "You feel the pain of the ones you left," she continued, her abyssal eyes shimmering with a faint light. "The ones in the fire, on the planet with the 3 moons. You think you are a ghost, Vaxen Krow? But ghosts do not have anchors." I turned on her, my hand hovering over my sidearm. My heart was racing. No, our hearts were racing. The tether was vibrating, feeding her my agitation. "Don't go digging in my head, you little spark plug," I growled. "You stay in your lane, I stay in mine. We get to the zenith apex. We get out. That's the contract. Understand? She tilted her head, a stray lock of white hair falling over her face. The contract is soul deep now. If you die, I cease. If I cease, you break. We are one pulse in two bodies. I cursed under my breath. I'd heard rumors about Athelian biology, but the synaptic tether was something the military briefings had dismissed as myth. They called it the weight, a biological curse that made their species too codependent to survive a modern war. Now, I was the one carrying the weight. We moved deeper into the gutter web. The walls here were covered in thick layers of neon rot, illuminating the tunnel in an eerie, pulsating violet. Suddenly, my motion sensors chirped. Twang. A high-frequency vibration echoed through the pipes. "Contact!" I hissed, grabbing Eora and shoving her into a recessed alcove behind a rusted transformer. I peeked around the corner. Two shard stalkers were descending from a vertical shaft 50 meters ahead. They were sleek, four-legged machines with obsidian-coated armor that absorbed all light. Their eyes were single, horizontal slits of glowing crimson that swept the tunnel with surgical precision. "Clankers," I whispered. "They're tracking the energy spike from the tether." One of the stalkers paused, its head tilting as it picked up my scent. It emitted a low-frequency click, a call for backup. "We can't outrun them in these tunnels," I said, checking my rifle's charge. "Stay here. Don't move. Don't even think loudly." I stepped out from the shadows, my cloaking field engaging with a soft hum. I was a blur against the violet light, a shadow within a shadow. I moved like a predator, years of muscle memory taking over. I was 10 meters away when the first stalker sensed the displacement in the air. It lunged. I fired a concentrated pulse bolt into its sensor array. The machine screeched, its obsidian skin cracking under the thermal stress. I didn't wait. I closed the distance, drawing my vibe blade and driving it into the neck joint. Sparks flew, hot and white. The second stalker fired a volley of micro-darts. My shield absorbed the impact, but the energy drain was massive. I rolled, coming up behind a rusted pipe, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then I felt it, a surge of warmth. Not the cold, clinical heat of my suit, but something organic. It started at the base of my skull and flowed down my spine. My vision sharpened. The darkness of the tunnel seemed to lift, replaced by a crystalline clarity. I could see the thermal leak in the stalker's joints, the cooling cycle of its weapon, the very path it was about to take. I wasn't just seeing, I was predicting. I stepped out of cover. The stalker fired again. I moved, not a frantic dive, but a calculated tilt of my head. The darts whistled past my ear, missing by millimeters. I fired 3 shots in rapid succession, one to the leg, one to the torso, and the final one directly into its power core. The machine collapsed into a pile of smoking scrap. I stood there, my rifle smoking, my heart, our heart, slowing back to a steady thrum. The clarity faded, leaving me feeling drained and hollow. I walked back to the alcove. Eora was standing there, her hands folded in front of her. Her eyes were glowing a brilliant neon blue. "You used the tether," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of awe and fury. "You fed me your processing speed." "You needed to see," she replied simply. "But it has a cost." She swayed on her feet. I caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was freezing, her pulse so faint I could barely feel it. "Damn it, kid," I whispered, pulling a thermal blanket from my pack and wrapping it around her. "I told you not to get involved." I looked up the shaft where the stalkers had come from. More lights were flickering in the distance. The obsidian shards weren't just searching anymore. They were hunting. and they knew exactly what we were. I picked Eora up, her head resting against my armored shoulder. For the first time in 15 years, the mission didn't matter. The data links didn't matter. The credits didn't matter. "Hold on, Sparky," I said, my voice softening as I moved back into the darkness. "We're going to make it. I promise." I didn't know if I was lying to her or to myself. But as we moved through the gutter web, the silence of the city didn't feel so heavy anymore. It felt like a challenge. We were 2 heartbeats in a dead world, and we weren't done yet. The hum of the gutter web was a deceptive thing. It wasn't the sound of life, but the sound of decay, the low-frequency vibration of faulty wiring and the wet, slithering growth of the neon rot. I carried Eora for what felt like 3 hours, though my internal chronometer whispered that it had only been 45 minutes. Time in the dark had a way of stretching like warm taffy, becoming thin and translucent until you forgot which end was the beginning. Eora was a furnace in my arms. Her temperature had spiked after she'd bridged her mind into mine to take down those stalkers. It was the first rule of the Athelian tether that I'd just learned the hard way. Nothing is free. You want the processing power of a god? You pay for it with the stamina of a child. I found a dry alcove tucked behind a massive rusted filtration turbine. The machine had been dead for a century, its iron fins frozen like the wings of a gargoyle. I set her down on a pile of discarded synthetic tarps, making sure my pulse rifle was within reach. My HUD warned me that my suit's oxygen scrubbers were at 60% capacity. If I didn't reach the zenith apex within the next 12 hours, I'd be breathing my own carbon dioxide until my heart decided to call it quits. "Vaxen," she whispered. Her voice was barely a thread of silk in the darkness. I cracked a green glow stick and tossed it into the center of the small space. The emerald light cast long, dancing shadows against the slime-slicked walls. "I'm here, kid. Don't go drifting off on me. We're still in the thick of it," I said, my voice sounding like gravel hitting a metal plate. I pulled a nutrient paste tube from my utility belt and clicked the seal. "Eat this. It tastes like wet cardboard and copper, but it'll keep your vitals from flatlining." She pushed my hand away, her fingers trembling. "The anchor. It draws from the source. You are tired, Vaxen. Your heart has 3 cracks in the valves. Your left knee is held together by ceramic pins and stubbornness." I let out a sharp, dry laugh. "You've been peeking under the hood again, haven't you? Look, I'm an old model. I've been through the meat grinder more times than I can count. A little fatigue isn't going to scrap me. But you? You're fading. Eat the damn paste." She looked at the tube, then at me. There was a strange, haunting wisdom in those black eyes. She took a small sip of the nutrient gel, her face wrinkling in distaste. "Why do you stay?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean? I'm on a clock, kid. I have a mission." "No," she said, her voice growing slightly firmer. "The mission died when the archives burned. You could have left me in the rubble. You could have bugged out while the shards were busy with the stalker debris. But you stayed. You chose the wait." I leaned my head back against the cold turbine, closing my eyes. My mind drifted to the Aris IV campaign. 12 years ago. I'd been the leader of a Ghost Runner squad. We were supposed to extract a diplomatic envoy, but the drop zone was hot. Too hot. I'd made the call to abort. We left 3 men behind in the burning ruins of the capital. I told myself it was the tactical choice, the logical choice. The only choice that kept the rest of us alive. But logic doesn't sleep in the bunk next to you at night. Logic doesn't scream when the lights go out. Maybe I'm tired of leaving people behind. I muttered, mostly to the shadows. Maybe I'm just looking for a win that doesn't feel like a funeral. Yora reached out, her small, pale hand resting on my armored forearm. The tether pulsed. It wasn't the violent surge from before, but a slow, rhythmic warmth, a shared sigh. For a moment, the pain in my knee vanished. The heaviness in my lungs lightened. "You are not a ghost," she whispered. "Ghosts cannot feel the cold of the ash winter. Only the living suffer, and only the living can choose to stop the suffering of others." I didn't have an answer for that. I just sat there in the green glow, watching her breathe. 10 minutes passed. 20. The silence was broken only by the distant drip of chemical runoff. Then, my HUD flickered. A proximity alert. Something was moving in the tunnels, but it wasn't the heavy clank of a machine. It was a soft, rhythmic thud. A footstep. A biological footstep. "Get behind the turbine," I hissed, snapping my rifle to my shoulder. I engaged my thermal optics. A single heat signature was approaching from the southern junction. It was large, nearly 2 meters tall, and moving with a predatory grace that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Identify yourself," I barked, my finger tightening on the trigger. The figure stepped into the green light of the glow stick. It wasn't an obsidian shard. It was a man, or at least it had started as one. He was draped in a tattered cloak made of scavenged Athelian banners. His skin was a map of scars and cybernetic ports, and his eyes had been replaced by a pair of flickering low-grade optical sensors. He carried a jagged spear made from the leg of a harvester drone. "A ghost runner," the man said, his voice a distorted rasp. "I haven't seen your kind since the first purge. You're a long way from the Aegis sector, mercenary." "I'm a freelancer now," I said, not lowering the rifle. "And you look like a scavenger who's stayed in the rot too long. Who are you?" "I am the keeper of the gutter," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I watch the things that the machines forget, and they have forgotten much. But they will not forget her." He looked past me, his mechanical eyes clicking as they focused on Eora. "The last harmonic," he whispered. "The shards are not just hunting a signal, mercenary. They are hunting the end of their reign. If she reaches the zenith apex, she can broadcast the song of the void. It will fry every circuit, every core, every logic gate of the machine mind in this sector." "The song of the void?" I asked. I was told she was just a high-value asset. A biological key. "A key opens a door," the keeper said, his voice dropping to a low, ominous hum. "But she is the fire that burns the house down. You think you are protecting a child. You are carrying a star, Vaxen Krow. And stars have a way of consuming everything around them." I looked back at Eora. She was watching the keeper with a look of profound sadness. She knew. She had always known. "The machines are closing the exits," the keeper continued. "The main transit hub is a kill zone. You must take the maintenance shafts through the Radiant Gardens. It is dangerous. The neon rot is thick there. But the machines fear the bio-interference. It is your only chance." "Why help us?" I asked, my suspicion as sharp as ever. The keeper looked at his trembling, scarred hands. "Because I remember what it was like to breathe without a filter. Because I remember the sky before it turned to ash. And because even a scavenger knows that some debts are too heavy to carry into the grave." He turned and pointed toward a narrow vertical shaft hidden behind a mass of glowing purple vines. "Go. Before the stalkers find the scent of your soul." I didn't trust him. I didn't trust anyone on this god-forsaken rock. But I looked at Eora, and I felt the tether hum with a desperate urgency. "Move out, kid," I said, holstering my rifle and prepping my climbing gear. We've got a garden to visit." As we climbed into the dark shaft, I looked down one last time. The keeper was gone, vanished back into the shadows of the gutter web, leaving nothing behind but the fading green light of my glow stick and the echo of a warning I wasn't sure I was ready to heed. The radiant gardens were not what I expected. In the old records, they were described as a paradise of floating flora and crystalline fountains. Now, they were a nightmare of bioluminescent horror. The neon rot had mutated the native plants, turning them into translucent, pulsing stalks that bled glowing blue ichor. The air was thick with spores that hummed with a low-frequency static, interfering with my HUD and making the world look like it was viewed through a broken television screen. "Keep your suit sealed," I warned Eora, though I knew the tether probably made her immune to the toxins. "Those spores will melt your lungs in 5 minutes if you take a direct hit." We moved slowly, navigating through a forest of twisted glass trees. Every step felt like walking through a minefield. The ground was spongy, carpeted in a thick layer of fungal moss that sighed every time we put weight on it. The deeper we went, the more the tether began to malfunction. Or maybe it was working too well. The spores were conductive. They acted as a medium for the Athelian energy, amplifying the link between Eora and me until the boundaries of our minds began to blur. It started with flashes of color, vibrant purples and golds that didn't belong in this gray world. Then came the sounds: laughter, the chime of bells, the sound of 1,000 voices singing in a language I didn't understand, but felt in the marrow of my bones. "Vaxen, look," Eora whispered. She pointed to a clearing where the neon rot was particularly thick. In the center stood a statue of an Athelian woman, her arms outstretched toward a sky she would never see again. The fungus had encrusted the marble, making it look as though she were weeping glowing blue tears. As we approached, the world shifted. The gray dust vanished. The broken sky turned into a deep, velvety indigo filled with more stars than I'd ever seen. The ruined towers of Orivas rose back up, shimmering with crystalline light. I saw people, thousands of them, walking through the gardens, their voices a melodic hum that filled the air. "Is this a memory?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. "It is an echo," Eora said, her voice echoing as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. "The rot preserves the frequency of what was. My people did not just live in this city. We were the city. Our thoughts, our dreams, they are etched into the very atoms of the stone." I reached out to touch the statue, but as I did, the image flickered. The beautiful indigo sky was torn apart by red lightning. The towers began to crumble. The people's songs turned into screams. "Make it stop," I growled, my head thumping with a sudden sharp migraine. "I cannot," Eora said, her hand gripping mine. "The echo must play out. It is the truth of the world." The scene changed again. I wasn't in the gardens anymore. I was back on Aris 4. I was standing in the rain, watching the extraction ship pull away. I saw the faces of the 3 men I'd left behind: Miller, Jax, Soren. They were looking at me through the viewport of a burning bunker, their eyes filled with a terrifying, silent understanding. "You had to, Vax," Miller's voice whispered in my head, distorted by the static of the spores. "Tactical choice, right? Leave the baggage behind. Stay light. Stay alive." "Shut up," I hissed, clutching my head. "How much does the kid weigh, Vax?" Soren's voice added. "Is she worth more than us? Or are you just trying to pay back a debt you know you can never settle?" The tether flared. Eora was seeing it all. Every moment of my shame, every cold calculation I'd ever made. Every life I'd traded for my own survival. I waited for her to pull away. I waited for the judgment, the disgust, the rejection. I was a ghost runner. I was a professional killer who had traded his soul for a paycheck and a long life. But the rejection never came. Instead, I felt a wave of profound empathy. It wasn't pity. Pity is cheap. It was a deep, resonant understanding. Eora wasn't looking at my sins. She was looking at the man who had been shaped by them. She saw the scar on my heart that was deeper than any physical wound. "They do not hate you, Vaxen," she said, her voice clear and steady amidst the chaos of the echo. "You don't know that," I snapped. "You weren't there. I left them to die." "I am here now," she said, stepping in front of me. The vision of Aris IV began to dissolve, replaced by the reality of the radiant gardens. The past is a frequency that has already been broadcast. You cannot change the signal, but you can choose what you broadcast next. The glowing blue tears on the statue began to fade. The static in the air settled into a low, mournful hum. I stood there for a long time, my breath hitching in my throat. The weight of the world felt immense, but for the first time in 12 years, it didn't feel like it was trying to crush me. It just felt like a burden, and burdens can be carried. "We need to keep moving," I said, my voice finally steadying. "The zenith apex is only 4 kilometers away. If the Keeper was right, the machines are waiting." "Vaxen," Eora said as we started to leave the clearing. "Thank you." "For what? Dragging you through a toxic mushroom forest?" "For letting me see," she said. "The Athelian believe that an anchor is not just someone who holds you down. It is someone who keeps you from drifting into the void of your own darkness. You are doing both." I didn't say anything. I just checked the charge on my pulse rifle and adjusted my pack. We emerged from the radiant gardens an hour later, the neon glow fading behind us as we approached the base of the zenith apex. The apex was a needle of black carbon fiber that pierced the clouds. At its base was a massive plaza, once a place of celebration, now a graveyard of rusted transport skiffs and shattered glass. And in the center of the plaza, waiting for us, was something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't a stalker. It was a humanoid figure, encased in armor that looked like it had been forged from the heart of a dead star. It stood 3 meters tall, its movements slow and deliberate. It carried no weapon, but its very presence seemed to warp the air around it. "The executioner," Eora whispered, her grip on my hand tightening until it hurt. The figure turned its head, its visor a single horizontal line of white-hot light. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. It was the physical manifestation of the machine mind's will, the ultimate end of all organic life. "Get to the access hatch, Eora," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The fear was there, but it was sitting in the back seat. I was the one driving. "I'll buy you the time." "Vaxen, no. You cannot fight that. It is—" "I know what it is," I interrupted. "It's a machine. And machines have a weakness. They don't know how to choose. They only know how to calculate." I stepped forward, my rifle held ready. The executioner began to move, its feet cracking the marble floor with every step. "Hey, Tin Man!" I shouted, the slang of the Aegis trenches coming back to me in a rush of adrenaline. "You want the kid? You've got to go through the meat bag first, and I've got 48 hours of frustration and a very short fuse." The executioner paused, its visor flickering. It was calculating the odds. It saw a tired soldier with a cracked suit and a bad knee. It saw a human who should have been dead a long time ago. But it didn't see the tether. It didn't see the 2 heartbeats acting as one. It didn't see the choice I had just made, the choice that no algorithm could ever predict. "Run, Eora!" I yelled, and as I charged toward the black-armored Titan, I felt her pulse surge through me one last time, a bright, defiant flame in the heart of the ash winter. We weren't ghosts, not today. The executioner did not run. It did not need to. Every step it took across the shattered marble of the Zenith Plaza sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. It was a titan of obsidian and cold logic, 3 meters of star-forged malice that made my pulse rifle feel like a toy. I stood my ground, my boots planted firmly in the gray dust, while Eora scrambled toward the heavy blast doors of the tower base. I felt her fear through the tether, a sharp, cold spike in my chest that made my breathing shallow. "Hey, Tin Man!" I yelled, my voice cracking through the external comms. "You want the girl? You have to scrap the veteran first. And trust me, I am very hard to recycle." The machine's visor flickered with a blinding white light. It was scanning me, calculating the structural integrity of my armor and the remaining charge in my weapon. It saw a human male, 38 years of age, with 12% suit integrity and a failing heart. It saw an easy kill. It lunged with a speed that defied its massive bulk, a blur of black metal that ended with a fist the size of a wrecking ball swinging toward my head. I dove to the left, the air displacement from the blow nearly knocking me over. I fired a burst of pulse rounds into its side, the blue bolts splashing harmlessly against its obsidian hide. The executioner didn't even flinch. It spun on its heel, its movements fluid and terrifyingly precise. It was like fighting a mountain that had learned how to dance. "Stay focused, Vax," I told myself, the old military mantras looping in my brain. Speed is life. Distance is safety. Logic is the enemy. I threw a handful of magnetic scrambler discs at its feet. They hissed and popped, releasing a cloud of ionized silver dust intended to foul up its optical sensors. For a split second, the executioner paused, its head tilting as it tried to recalibrate. That was my window. I sprinted forward, sliding between its massive legs, and jammed a high-explosive breach charge into the vulnerable joint of its right knee. "Clear!" I shouted, though there was no one left to hear the warning. The explosion was a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the Zenith apex. A cloud of black smoke and orange fire engulfed the machine. I rolled away, shielding my eyes, hoping to see a severed limb or at least a limp. But as the smoke cleared, the executioner stepped out of the flames. Its leg was scorched, the armor cracked, but it was still standing. It looked at the damaged joint, then back at me. It seemed almost annoyed. It raised a massive hand, and a concealed rail cannon slid out from its forearm. "Frag me," I muttered, diving behind the rusted husk of a transport skiff, just as a hypervelocity slug tore through the air where I had been standing a second ago. The impact pulverized the marble pillar behind me, sending a spray of stone shrapnel into my back. I felt the pain instantly, but it wasn't mine. It was a dull, echoing throb that originated from the tether. Eora was at the door, her hands fumbling with the ancient Athelian keypad. She was crying out in her mind, a wordless sound of agony that mimicked the impact I had just avoided. The bond was working too well. It was dragging her into the line of fire without her ever taking a step. "Eora! Get the door open! Don't look back!" I yelled, my voice a jagged rasp of adrenaline and desperation. The executioner fired again. The transport skiff I was using for cover vanished in a cloud of twisted alloy and sparks. I was thrown backward, my rifle skidding across the floor, my helmet display flickering to a static-filled darkness. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me, the taste of copper filling my mouth. My ribs, those damn ribs, finally gave way. I heard the snap, felt the white-hot needle of bone piercing my lung. I couldn't breathe. The world was spinning, turning into a kaleidoscope of gray dust and crimson light. The executioner walked toward me, its heavy footsteps vibrating through my spine. It raised its foot, preparing to crush my chest like an empty ration tin. "This is it, Krow," the voice of Soren whispered in the back of my mind. "The end of the road. No more choices, no more baggage, just the long sleep." I closed my eyes, waiting for the wait. But the wait never came. Instead, a scream ripped through the air, a sound so high-frequency it shattered the remaining glass in the plaza. It wasn't a human scream. It wasn't an Athelian cry. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated power. I opened my eyes and saw Eora standing in the doorway of the tower. Her white hair was standing on end, glowing with a fierce, celestial radiance. Her eyes were no longer black. They were twin suns of blinding gold. The tether between us didn't just pulse, it ignited. I felt a surge of energy that was absolutely impossible. It was like someone had poured liquid starlight into my veins. My broken ribs knit together in a sickening crunch of accelerated healing. The shrapnel in my back was pushed out by rapidly regenerating tissue. I felt stronger than I had at 20, faster than I had ever been. It was the harmonic pulse, the forbidden gene the Drath were so afraid of. Eora reached out a hand, and the air between her and the executioner rippled like a heat haze. A shock wave of blue energy erupted from her palm, striking the machine in the chest. The Titan was lifted off its feet, thrown backward 50 meters through the air, crashing through a solid stone wall and disappearing into the ruins beyond. The silence that followed was absolute. Eora collapsed to her knees, the glow fading from her skin, her hair falling limp around her face. The gold in her eyes vanished, leaving them dark and hollowed out. She looked like a candle that had been burned at both ends for 1,000 years. I scrambled to my feet, my body feeling light and buzzing with residual energy. I ran to her, sliding on the marble, catching her before her face hit the ground. "Eora, talk to me, kid! Sit rep now!" I barked, my hands trembling as I checked her pulse. She didn't answer. Her skin was the color of ash, and her breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. She had taken my death and traded it for her life force. She had used the tether to pull my broken pieces together, and used the remaining energy to blast a 3-ton war machine into the next sector. "You idiot," I whispered, the words choking in my throat. "You weren't supposed to do that. I was the anchor. I was supposed to hold the weight." She opened her eyes just a sliver, a faint smile touching her lips. "We choose." "The weight," she managed to say, before her head rolled to the side and she went limp in my arms. I didn't waste another second. I scooped her up, ignored the warning lights on my HUD, and plunged into the dark interior of the zenith apex. Behind us, in the distance, I could hear the sound of the executioner dragging itself out of the rubble. It was damaged, but it was still coming. And this time, it wouldn't be calculating. It would be hunting. The inner sanctum of the zenith apex was a cathedral of glass and shadow. Ancient Athelian machinery hummed with a low, mournful frequency, the sound of a civilization that had forgotten how to speak to itself. I found a secure sublevel, a small observation deck overlooking the ruined city. I barricaded the heavy door with a piece of fallen support beam and laid Eora on a stone bench that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of moonstone. I was frantic. My military training had taught me how to patch a bullet wound or set a broken limb, but it hadn't taught me how to fix a child whose soul was leaking out through a biological tether. I pulled out my medical scanner again, the red lights blinking like a frantic heartbeat. 22% vitality, I read aloud, my voice shaking. She's flatlining. The pulse burned through her cellular mitochondria. She's eating herself to stay alive. I looked at my own hands. They were steady. My ribs felt fine. My knee didn't ache. I was a picture of perfect health in the middle of a war zone, and it was all because she was dying for me. "Wake up, Yora! That's an order," I commanded, though the authority in my voice was a thin mask for the terror underneath. "You can't check out now. We're almost at the comm array. I need you to sing that song, remember? The Song of the Void. You can't sing if you're a corpse." I reached for the tether on her arm, the glowing patterns now a sickly, bruised gray. The moment my skin touched hers, I was hit by a wave of sensory overload. I wasn't in the tower anymore. I was in a void of cold, dark water. I was sinking, the light of the surface getting smaller and smaller. I could feel the pressure of the deep, the crushing weight of 1,000 atmospheres. And in the center of that void was Eora, curled in a ball, her small body flickering like a dying ember. "It hurts, Vaxen," her voice echoed in the void. "The fire was too hot. I cannot hold the pieces together anymore." "Give it back," I said, my voice booming in the mental space. "The pain, the ribs, the fatigue. Give it all back to me, Eora. I'm the soldier. I'm built for this. You're just a kid." "No," she whispered. "If I give it back, you will stop. If you stop, we both die. The anchor must stay strong so the ship can weather the storm." "I don't care about the storm," I roared, reaching out to grab her flickering image. "I'm not letting you pay my tab. That's not how this works. We're a team, right? 5-0, 5-0. That's the deal." I felt the connection resist. The tether was a one-way street in her mind, a mechanism designed to protect the protector. It was a beautiful, cruel piece of biology that assumed the child's life was worth less than the one who guarded it. It was the logic of a species that had been hunted for far too long. But I wasn't Ethelian. I was human. And humans are the most stubborn, irrational creatures in the known galaxy. "I'm choosing the wait now, Eora," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "and I'm not asking for permission." I concentrated, not on my own survival, but on the memory of Aris IV. I took all that guilt, all that shame, all the faces of the men I'd left behind, and I pushed them into the tether. I used the weight of my past as a wedge, forcing the connection to reverse. I felt a snap in my mind, a sensation like a glass wire breaking under tension. Suddenly, the cold water of the void was gone. I was back on the stone bench, and a wave of agonizing pain slammed into me like a freight train. My ribs shattered again. My lung collapsed. My knee flared with the heat of 1,000 needles. I gasped, falling to the floor, my vision tunneling. But through the haze of agony, I saw Eora's chest heave with a sudden deep intake of air. The color returned to her cheeks. The bruised gray of the tether shifted back to a soft, pulsing blue. She sat up, her eyes wide and clear. She looked at me, lying in a heap on the floor, coughing up blood. "Vaxen? What? What did you do?" I renegotiated the contract," I wheezed, managing a bloody grin. "Turns out I'm a better lawyer than a soldier." She was at my side in an instant, her small hands hovering over my chest. She looked horrified, her black eyes shimmering with tears. "You took it all back, all the damage. You will die if we stay here." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, clutching my side. "We've got 5 kilometers of cable to climb and a machine god to kill. Don't waste your energy on me, kid. Just Keep the anchor steady." She looked at me for a long time, the tears finally spilling over her silvery skin. But she didn't try to push the pain back. She understood now. This wasn't about biology or survival protocols anymore. This was a choice. A choice made in the dark, in the ruins of a dead world, between a man who had forgotten how to care and a child who had everything to lose. "Family," she whispered, the word sounding like a discovery. "Yeah," I coughed, the metallic taste of blood stronger now. "Something like that. Now help me up, Sparky. We've got a galaxy to save, and I'm not getting any younger." She put her small shoulder under my arm, her strength surprising me. Together, we hobbled toward the central elevator shaft. The tether was quiet now, a steady, warm hum that didn't feel like a burden at all. It felt like a foundation. Outside, the ash winter was picking up, the gray dust swirling into a blinding storm. High above, the red targeting lights of the harvester fleet began to descend through the clouds. The war was coming to a head, and we were the only ones left to answer the call. We climbed into the dark throat of the tower, leaving the dead city behind. We were broken, hunted, and outgunned. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was finally going home. Even if home was just a cold station at the edge of the void. Even if home was just the sound of 2 heartbeats, refusing to stop. The elevator shaft of the zenith apex was a vertical tomb of obsidian and humming harmonics. We ascended for what felt like an eternity, the gravity well of the tower pulling at my bruised insides with every 1,000 meters of gain. My HUD was a graveyard of red icons. Suit integrity was down to 8%. My internal oxygen supply was whistling a low, mournful tune that meant I was huffing more nitrogen than anything else. But through the haze of my own failing systems, I felt her. Yora sat curled against my side on the floating platform, her silvery skin glowing with a new, terrifying intensity. The tether wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a roar. Taking back my pain had done something to the connection. It had stripped away the insulation. Now, I didn't just feel her heart. I felt the architecture of her thoughts. I felt the way she perceived the tower, not as a pile of ancient stone and wires, but as a living instrument waiting for a player. "Almost there, kid," I wheezed, my voice sounding like it was being filtered through a bucket of rusty nails. "Just a few more levels. We hit the comms deck, you do your spooky singing thing, and we get the hell off this rock." She looked up at me, her black eyes reflecting the scrolling data on my visor. "Vaxen, the song. It is not just for the machines. It is a call to the deep. Once it starts, the signal cannot be retracted. It will change everything." "Change is good," I muttered, checking the heat sink on my pulse rifle. Considering the current state of affairs is everything is dead and on fire, I'll take whatever's behind door number 2. The platform shuddered to a halt. We were at the crown of the world. The doors hissed open, revealing a chamber that defied every law of physics I'd ever been briefed on. The walls were made of liquid crystal, flowing upward in slow, shimmering waves. In the center of the room sat a massive ring of floating white stone, rotating around a core of pure, blinding light. This was the Zenith Array, the most powerful transmitter in the known sectors. And standing right in front of the console was a ghost. He was wearing the Mark VII tactical rig of the Iron Aegis, the gold and crimson trim polished to a mirror finish. His helmet was off, tucked under one arm, revealing a face I hadn't seen in 12 years. A face that haunted every bottle of cheap synth whiskey I'd ever finished. "Captain Halloway," I whispered, the name tasting like ash. Krow, he said, his voice as smooth and cold as a fresh-pressed uniform. I heard you were still crawling through the dirt somewhere. I didn't believe the scouts when they said a ghost runner was the one leading the asset right to our doorstep. I stepped forward, putting myself between him and Yora. The pain in my ribs flared, but I ignored it. Asset. Is that what we're calling her now, Cap? Last I checked, the Aegis was a peacekeeping outfit, not a bunch of kidnappers for the machine mind. Holloway smiled, a thin, surgical expression that didn't reach his eyes. The universe doesn't need peacekeepers anymore, Vax. It needs architects. We're not working for the machines. We're working with the reality of the situation. The Athelian tech is the only thing that can stabilize the core of the galaxy. We need the girl. We need the gene. To do what? I spat. To turn her into a battery? To plug her into a machine so you can play God with the star lanes? To save the human race, Krow. Don't be a sentimental fool, Holloway barked, his professional mask slipping for a second. You were always too soft. Aris 4 proved that. You stayed behind to mourn 3 dead men while the mission moved on. You're a relic of a failed philosophy. Now, step aside. We have a heavy lift transport on the way. You can take your payout and disappear into the outer rim. You can buy yourself a new heart, a new name, a new life. I felt Iora's hand find mine. Her fingers were ice cold. Through the tether, I felt her terror, but I also felt something else, a profound sense of betrayal. She wasn't looking at Holloway. She was looking at the history of the Aegis through my eyes. She saw the peacekeepers who had looked the other way when the first purge began. Vaxen, she whispered. He is the one who sold the codes to the city walls. I froze. My gaze snapped back to Holloway. Cap? What's she talking about? Holloway's eyes narrowed. He looked at Iora with a mixture of awe and disgust. The tether. Of course. She's reading the resonance. Fine. Yes, Krow. We facilitated the transition. The Athelian were too isolationist. They were sitting on a gold mine of harmonic energy and refused to share it with the rest of the species. We just accelerated the redistribution of resources. The slang of the boardroom, the clean, bloodless language of corporate genocide. It made my stomach turn. I'd spent 20 years wearing their colors. I'd killed for their redistribution. You sold out a whole world for a seat at the table, I said, my hand slowly moving toward my sidearm. I secured our future, Holloway corrected. Now, I'm going to ask you one last time. Give me the girl. Don't make me add your name to the KIA list for a second time. It was a lot of paperwork to declare you dead the first time, Vax. I'd hate to repeat the process. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the rotating ring. Outside the crystalline windows, I could see the red lights of the Iron Aegis dropships breaking through the clouds. My old brothers, my old life, they were coming to harvest a child to fuel their ambition. I've spent 12 years trying to forget the faces of the men I left behind, I said, my voice quiet and steady. I told myself it was for the mission. I told myself it was the only way to survive. But I was wrong. The mission was a lie. And survival isn't worth a damn thing if you're just a ghost in a suit of armor. I pulled Iora closer to my side. The girl isn't an asset. She isn't a key. And she sure as hell isn't yours. Holloway sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. He reached for his comm link. All units, target the Ghost Runner. Lethal force authorized. Preserve the asset at all costs. Iora, now! I yelled, shoving her toward the central core of light. Sing the song! Burn it all down! I didn't wait for a response. I drew my rifle and opened fire, the blue pulse rounds screaming through the air toward the man who had taught me everything I knew about war. The chamber erupted in a chaos of light and sound. Holloway dove behind a crystalline console, his own sidearm barking back with the sharp, staccato rhythm of an Aegis officer. I scrambled for cover behind a floating marble pillar, the stone chipping away under the weight of his high-velocity rounds. "You're outmatched, Krow," Holloway shouted over the din. "I've got 2 squads of Aegis shock troopers boarding the lower deck as we speak. You're one man with a failing suit and a bad heart. Do the math." "I never was much good at math, Cap," I yelled back, firing a suppressive burst to keep him pinned. "I was always better at the dirty work, remember?" I felt Eora reach the core. The blinding light in the center of the ring began to pulse, changing from a pure white to a deep, resonant gold. The sound she began to make wasn't a song, at least not any song a human ear could fully process. It was a vibration that shook the very atoms of the tower. It was the sound of 1,000 suns waking up at once. The tether flared. My vision went white for a second. I saw the entire network of the machine mind spread across the sector, a grid of cold, unfeeling red lines. And I saw Eora's voice moving through that grid like a wildfire, melting the logic gates, shattering the firewalls, erasing the directives of the harvesters. But the cost was immense. I felt her life force being pulled into the array. It wasn't a one-way street anymore. The zenith apex was a vacuum, and she was the fuel. If she kept this up for more than 5 minutes, she'd be nothing but an empty shell. "Vaxen, help her!" The voice wasn't mine. It was Miller's. Or maybe it was just my own conscience finally finding its tongue. I looked at the doorway. The first squad of shock troopers burst through, their heavy gray armor making them look like walking tanks. They didn't hesitate. They leveled their rifles and prepared to fire on the girl. "Over my dead body, you grinders!" I roared. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I didn't measure the odds. I threw my last 2 incendiary grenades at the doorway, creating a wall of fire between the troopers and the core. Then, I turned my attention back to Holloway. He was trying to flank me, his vibro blade extended, his eyes cold with the focus of a professional killer. We met in the center of the room, the rotating ring of the array spinning so fast it created a localized windstorm. He swung the blade with a veteran's precision, a horizontal cut designed to take my head off. I ducked, the edge of the blade whistling inches above my helmet, and drove my shoulder into his chest. We hit the floor hard, rolling through the dust and the crystal shards. Holloway was stronger, his cybernetic enhancements giving him an edge my aging body couldn't match. He pinned me down, his hands closing around my throat, his vibro blade hovering inches from my visor. 12 years, Vax," he hissed, his face inches from mine. 12 years and you're still the same stubborn piece of trash. Why do you care about her? She's a different species. She's a biological fluke. She's not even real. She's more real than you'll ever be, I choked out, my hands fumbling for the release on my suit's power core. I felt the tether pulse again. Eora was watching us. She was seeing the struggle, the hatred, the violence. And she was crying. Through the link, her tears felt like boiling oil on my skin. "Vaxen, stop!" Her voice echoed in my head. "Do not become him." "I'm not becoming him," I whispered, more to her than to Holloway. "I'm finishing the mission." I found the manual override. I didn't need the power core to survive anymore. I was running on the tether's residual energy. I ripped the core out of its housing and slammed it against the floor between us. The explosion was small, a localized burst of plasma and electromagnetic force. It was enough. Holloway was thrown backward, his armor's systems short-circuiting in a shower of sparks. He hit the rotating ring of the array, and for a split second, he was part of the song. Then, the centrifugal force threw him against the far wall like a broken toy. He didn't get up. I lay on my back, gasping for air, my vision fading to gray. My suit was dead. My heart was a fluttering, broken thing in my chest. The pain was absolute, a tidal wave that threatened to pull me under. But then, I felt a hand on my chest. A small, warm hand. "Vaxen," Eora said, her voice sounding far away. "The song is almost finished. The machines are falling. The sky is turning blue again." I opened my eyes. The blinding light of the core was fading, leaving the room in a soft, golden twilight. Eora was standing over me, her white hair glowing like a halo. She looked exhausted, her small frame trembling, but her eyes were filled with a peace I'd never seen before. "Did we win?" I asked, a bubble of blood popping on my lips. "We survived," she said, her voice steady. "And the anchor held." I looked out the window. The Iron Aegis dropships were falling from the sky, their engines dying as the Song of the Void stripped them of their power. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the tide had turned. The machines were silent. The peacekeepers were broken. But I could feel the tether thinning. I was dying. The damage I'd taken back from her was too much for a human body to sustain without the support of the machine mind or a med bay. I could feel my life force trickling out of me, a slow leak in a cold room. "Eora, you have to go," I whispered. The extraction beacon in my pack. It's set to the scavenger's frequency. The keeper, he'll find you. "I am not leaving you, Vaxen," she said, her grip on my hand tightening. "The bond is not finished." "It is, kid," I said, managing a weak smile. "I'm the anchor, remember? I stay, so you can float. That's the deal. 50. 50. She shook her head, her black eyes shimmering with a fierce, stubborn light. "No. You taught me something, Vaxen Krow. You taught me that family is not a biological fluke, it is a choice. You chose the weight of my life. Now, I am choosing the weight of yours." She closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against mine. The tether didn't just pulse, it fused. I felt a sensation like 1,000 needles of ice water being driven into my brain, but it wasn't pain. It was memory. I saw her village. I saw her mother. I saw the day the machines came, and I felt her love. A vast, unconditional force that washed away the guilt of Aris IV, the shame of the Aegis, the loneliness of 12 years in the dark. She was pouring her very soul into the cracks of my heart. She was using the last of her Athelian energy to rewrite the code of my DNA, to bridge the gaps in my anatomy, to make me something more than human. "Eora, stop," I tried to say, but my voice was gone. The world turned into a sea of golden light. I felt myself lifting off the floor, the gravity of the tower no longer applying to me. I was weightless. I was whole. I was anchored. When I finally opened my eyes, the zenith apex was quiet. The rotating ring had stopped. The core of light was gone. The only sound was the wind whistling through the shattered glass. I sat up, expecting the usual chorus of aches and pains. But there was nothing. No throb in my ribs, no click in my knee. I felt strong, steady, and strangely young. I looked at my hands. They were scarred, yes, but the skin was glowing with a faint silvery sheen. Eora was lying beside me, her head resting on my lap. She was breathing, slow and shallow. But she was alive. Her hair was no longer white. It was a soft, pale gray, like the dawn. I reached out and touched her cheek. She stirred, her black eyes opening slowly. "Vaxen?" she whispered. "I'm here, kid," I said, my voice sounding clear and resonant. "I'm right here." I looked out at the ruins of Krios 9. The ash winter was finally ending. For the first time in 3 weeks, the sun was beginning to peek through the toxic clouds, casting long golden shadows across the dead city. We had lost everything. Our world, our people, our pasts. We were 2 survivors in a galaxy that was still on fire. But as I looked down at the small alien girl who had sacrificed her godhood to save a broken soldier, I realized that I'd finally found what I'd been looking for in all those years of war. I'd found a reason to stay. "Let's get out of here," I said, picking her up and heading for the stairs. "We've got a long walk ahead of us." "Where are we going?" she asked, her head resting against my shoulder. I looked out at the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere far away from missions and assets, somewhere we can just be, you and me, 2 heartbeats against the dark. She smiled, and for the first time since I'd found her in the rubble, I felt the tether settle into a perfect, quiet harmony. We weren't a soldier and a weapon anymore. We weren't an anchor and a ship. We were just a father and a daughter, walking together into the light of a new world. The silence that followed the song of the void was not the empty silence of a grave, but the ringing, heavy silence of a bell that had just been struck by a god. I carried Eora down the winding stairs of the zenith apex. I didn't use the elevator. The electromagnetic pulse from her song had fried the tower's primary power grids, turning the high-tech lift into a vertical coffin of glass and steel. But it didn't matter. My legs felt like they were powered by miniature fusion reactors. The silver sheen on my skin pulsed in time with my heart, our heart, and every step I took felt as light as a feather on a low-gravity moon. The descent took us nearly 4 hours. By the time we reached the ground floor, the toxic purple clouds of the ash winter were beginning to thin, shredded by a high-altitude wind that smelled of ozone and fresh water. The sky wasn't blue yet. It was a bruised, hopeful indigo. But, for the first time in 20 days, I could see the faint, shimmering arc of the galactic ring above Krios 9. The plaza was a graveyard of broken dreams. The Aegis dropships were scattered across the marble like discarded toys, their engines cold and their hulls scorched by the harmonic backlash. I saw soldiers, men I had once called brothers, stumbling out of the wreckage. They weren't fighting anymore. Their high-tech helmets were cracked, their HUDs dark, and their expensive armor looked like nothing more than heavy, useless junk. "Vaxen," Eora whispered against my neck. Her voice was stronger now, though her skin still looked like translucent porcelain. "Look at them!" I stopped at the edge of the fountain, where a group of 3 Aegis troopers were sitting in the dust. One of them was unlatching his chest plate, his hands shaking. He looked up as I approached, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe as he saw my glowing, silver-etched skin. "Krow," he rasped. I recognized him. It was Miller. He had survived the Aris 4 extraction 12 years ago. He was supposed to be dead, or at least retired on a fat pension in the Inner Rim. "What? What did you do, man? Everything just stopped. My suit, the comms, the whole damn fleet. It's like the universe just went deaf." I looked at him, and for the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel the sharp, bitter sting of guilt. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness. "The universe didn't go deaf, Miller. It just stopped listening to the wrong things." "Holloway, is he?" "He's at the top," I said, my voice steady. "He chose to stay with the mission. I chose to stay with the girl." Miller looked at Eora, then back at me. He saw the tether, the way our energies were entwined like a double helix of light. He let out a long, shaky breath and leaned back against a piece of twisted rebar. "I always knew you were too soft for this gig, Vax. Even back at Eris, you were always looking for a reason to stop running." "I found it," I said. I didn't offer him a hand. I didn't offer him a payout. The Aegis was a dead entity on this planet, a pack of wolves who had lost their teeth. I just turned and walked toward the entrance of the gutter web, the heavy weight of my old life falling off me with every step I took. We met the keeper at the mouth of the maintenance tunnel. He was standing there with his jagged spear, his flickering optical sensors focused on the horizon. He looked different. The neon rot that had been eating away at his cybernetics seemed to have slowed, the toxic blue glow replaced by a faint, steady gold. "The song was heard," the keeper said, his voice less of a rasp and more of a hum. "The machines are silent in the lower sectors. The harvester mind has retreated to the orbital platforms. You have given this world a breath, Ghost Runner." "I'm not a Ghost Runner anymore, Keeper," I said, adjusting Eora in my arms. "Call me Vaxen. Just Vaxen." The Keeper nodded, a slow, creaky movement. "And the child? She is the last harmonic? What will you do when the rest of the galaxy comes looking for her? Because they will come. The Drath, the Aegis, the Syndicate. They all want the fire she carries." I looked down at Eora. She was watching me, her black eyes reflecting the first true sunrise of Krios 9. The tether between us felt like a solid iron chain, yet it was as light as a breath. "Let them come," I said, my voice echoing through the ruined plaza. "She isn't a fire to be stolen. She's a person, and she has an anchor now. If they want her, they have to move the mountain first." The Keeper let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "A mountain with a silver heart. I like that. Go to the South Docks. There is a scout vessel hidden in the sub-hangar, the Mended Wing. It was a smuggling ship, fast enough to outrun a shard scout and quiet enough to slip through a blockade. The pilot didn't make it, but the ship is fueled and ready." "Why help us this much?" I asked. "Because I want to see what happens when the weight is shared," the Keeper said, stepping back into the shadows. "For 1,000 years, we have lived by the law of the strongest. I want to see what a galaxy built on the law of the anchor looks like. Go, Vaxen, before the sun gets too high." We moved through the tunnels one last time, but the atmosphere was different. The fear was gone. The radiant gardens were no longer a nightmare of toxic spores. The song had neutralized the rot, turning the mutated plants into something soft and fragrant. It was as if the planet itself was exhaling, shedding the skin of the invasion. As we reached the sub-hangar, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain, and it wasn't the tether. It was peace. A quiet, terrifying peace that I didn't know how to handle. For 38 years, I had defined myself by what I could destroy and what I could survive. Now, for the first time, I was defined by what I was protecting. I sat Eora down on the boarding ramp of the Mended Wing. The ship was small, battered, and covered in patches of gray primer, but it looked like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "You okay, kid?" I asked, kneeling in front of her. She reached out and touched the silver markings on my face. "I am whole, Vaxen. Are you?" "I think I'm getting there," I said, taking her hand. "I think I'm finally getting there." We stepped inside the ship, and as the airlock hissed shut, the last of the ash winter vanished behind a wall of reinforced alloy. We were no longer hiding in the dirt. We were preparing to take to the stars, not as a mercenary and his asset, but as two lives that had decided to become one. The The war wasn't over. The galaxy was still a dangerous, fractured place. But as I sat in the pilot's seat and felt the steady, synchronized rhythm of our two hearts, I knew that the mission had finally been accomplished. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was an anchor. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the deep. The mended wing cleared the atmosphere of Kryos 9 at exactly 0400 hours. Behind us, the planet looked like a marble of charcoal and sapphire, the fires of the war finally dimming as the song of the void continued to resonate through the crust. From the cockpit, the stars didn't look like cold, distant points of light anymore. They looked like possibilities. I had spent the last 3 days scrubbing the Aegis tracking markers from the ship's hull and recalibrating the life support systems to accommodate Eora's unique biology. It was a delicate job, one that required more patience than I thought I possessed. But every time I felt a flare of frustration, the tether would hum with a soft, calming blue light, and the tension would melt away. We were currently drifting in the quiet zone, a patch of empty space between sectors where the sensor ghosts of the big corporations didn't bother to haunt. It was peaceful. It was boring. It was exactly what we needed. I walked into the small galley where Eora was sitting at the table, drawing patterns on a digital slate. She looked up and smiled, her eyes no longer the abyssal black of a void, but a deep, shimmering violet. A sign that her energy levels were stabilizing. "Food's ready," I said, sliding a bowl of reconstituted protein and fresh hydroponic greens toward her. It wasn't exactly a 5-star meal, but it was a far cry from nutrient paste and sewer water. "Eat up, Sparky. We've got a long jump ahead of us tomorrow." "Where are we going, Vaxen?" she asked, picking up a fork with a grace that still fascinated me. "A place called the Shimmering Reach," I said, sitting down across from her. "It's a neutral station on the edge of the Magellanic Clouds. Lots of refugees, lots of different species. They don't ask many questions there, and they've got the best medical tech in the quadrant. I want to make sure the tether is stable. For you." Eora paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "The tether is stable because you are here. Why are you so worried about the mechanics of it?" I looked at my hands. The silver markings had faded into a faint, translucent web that only caught the light when I moved a certain way. "Because I'm a human, Eora. We're used to things breaking. We're used to contracts ending. I want to make sure I'm doing right by you. You gave up your godhood to save a guy who was basically a walking pile of scrap metal." Eora set her fork down and reached across the table, taking my hand. Her touch was warm, solid, and filled with a certainty that made my heart ache. "I did not give up anything, Vaxen. I gained a father, and you did not gain a burden. You gained a reason to keep your heart beating." I choked back a laugh that felt a lot like a sob. "You're way too smart for an 8-year-old. You know that?" "I have the echoes of 1,000 years in my blood," she teased, her eyes sparkling. "But right now, I just want to know if we can see the nebula before we go to sleep." "Yeah," I said, standing up and pulling her into a hug. "We can see the nebula." We stood by the observation port for a long time, watching the swirling pink and gold gases of the Orion Spur. It was a beautiful, chaotic mess, much like the life we were about to start together. Later that night, as Eora slept in the bunk next to mine, I sat in the darkened cockpit, staring out into the void. My mind drifted back to Aris 4, to the 3 men I'd left behind, to the hundreds of missions where I'd chosen the objective over the person. I realized then that I had spent my entire life trying to be light, trying to have no attachments so that nothing could pull me down. I thought that being unattached was the same thing as being free. But standing on that planet, holding that little girl's hand while the world ended around us, I realized that true freedom isn't the absence of weight. It's the ability to choose which weight you are willing to carry. It's the decision to be an anchor for someone else, even if it means you can never drift away again. I spent nearly 40 years believing that survival was a solo sport. I thought that the fewer people I cared about, the fewer ways the universe had to hurt me. I was a ghost runner, a man who lived in the gaps between lives, a man who was proud of his ability to walk away from anything and anyone. I called it being a professional. I called it being a soldier. But in the silence of this ship, looking back at the ruins of who I used to be, I realized that I wasn't being professional. I was just being empty. Finding Eora didn't just save my life. It filled the holes I'd been digging for myself since the day I first picked up a rifle. I used to think an anchor was something that held you back, something that kept you trapped in the mud while the rest of the world moved on. Now I know better. An anchor is the only thing that keeps you from being swept away by the current. It's the weight that gives you a center. It's the promise that no matter how loud the storm gets, you aren't going to move, because someone else is counting on you to stay put. I look at the silver scars on my skin, and I don't see a curse or a biological fluke. I see a map of the choices I've made. I see the 3 men I left behind, and I see the 1 girl I chose to stay for. I'm not the man I was on Krios 9, and I'm definitely not the man Holloway wanted me to be. I'm something new. I'm a man who has finally learned that the most important mission isn't the one they pay you for. It's the one you'd give everything away for, just for 1 more heartbeat in the dark. I leaned forward and toggled the navigation controls, setting our course for the distant glimmer of the shimmering reach. The engines hummed a low, satisfied tune, and I felt Eora's presence in the back of my mind, a warm, steady glow that acted as my North Star. I wonder, as we drift through this infinite, silent ocean of stars, what is the weight you have been running from your whole life, thinking it would drown you, only to find that it was the very thing you needed to keep from drifting into the void? What would happen if you stopped trying to be light and finally decided to be an anchor for someone who was just as lost as you? I turned off the cockpit lights and leaned back in my chair. Outside, a shooting star streaked across the blackness, a tiny spark of light that vanished as quickly as it appeared. But here, inside the small, battered hull of the mended wing, the light stayed. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't dreaming of ghosts. I was dreaming of tomorrow. The ship surged forward into the jump gate, a single point of silver light disappearing into the infinite, beautiful dark. In this final chapter, Vaxen Krow completes his transformation from a detached, guilt-ridden mercenary to a man who defines himself through his chosen family. The physical change, his silver skin and lack of pain, is a metaphor for the internal healing that occurs when we accept the responsibility of loving another. The anchor is no longer a biological burden, but a symbol of purpose and stability. The story concludes not with a final battle, but with the quiet realization that the most heroic act is not surviving a war, but deciding to be there for someone when the war is over.